Okay, here we are. Richard MacGeorge in New Zealand, Aotearoa. How are you, Richard?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to
Well,
see you, Marcus.
I want to thank you for showing up and being here for these short conversations for what I'm calling Futures 101. Now, Richard, you're working on infrastructure futures, um, doing some really interesting stuff on the genealogical and obviously you've used creative processes and so on. But, I want to know how you got here first. So can you give us a very quick snapshot of your professional background, please?
Okay, happy to, Marcus. As you can tell, I'm a later career professional, and I have focused since my mid-20s on infrastructure, and particularly infrastructure financing as my profession. So I started out life working for an investment bank in London as a financial analyst, doing financial forecasting of infrastructure projects. And then I spent 12 years doing that with different investment banks in Asia and then to Australia. Came back to New Zealand to set up a consultancy helping governments think about infrastructure policy development. And then ultimately, things pivoted when the Canterbury earthquakes occurred back in 2010, 2011, and I went to support the Earthquake Recovery Authority that was set up then, which led to some really big questions for me around long-term infrastructure planning. And after that period, I started a PhD, but that got interrupted by an opportunity to join the World Bank in Washington, DC, where I spent 6 years, and then I came back to New Zealand in 2020, of course, at the time of COVID. And so I have moved in some ways from the practical application of the day-to-day of infrastructure delivery to thinking at a later stage in my career, what's the value that I can add from here? Not just what can I pass on about what I've learned, but what new things can I learn and pass on?
Beautiful. That's a very impressive CV you've just given us there, Richard. Yeah. So I've got four questions which I'm asking everybody. So your first
Okay.
question: how did you actually get into futures? Now, I guess you met somebody or you went to something. So can you give us a glimpse, please, of that?
Yeah, I think that Canterbury earthquake time was really quite transformational for me because I had to start in that Earthquake Recovery Authority asking really big questions around long-term strategic directions for infrastructure and connecting infrastructure to its purpose, which is around, at that time, I was thinking human well-being and the relationships between infrastructure and human well-being, which of course then raises questions around where are we going and how do we plan for the where we might be going. So that's how I really started. In fact, I think anyone who's involved in long-term planning and infrastructure, because it has such a long life, doesn't matter whether it's a bridge or a power station, it causes us to think about the future. But I realized increasingly that the way we thought about the future through that infrastructure lens was quite entrenched. Relying on past data to predict the future. In some ways, it's like we reverse into the future rather than wondering around the possibilities. And so there was something missing for me. But then I went off to the World Bank and it was very much back into the day-to-day of the infrastructure world. But this kept bubbling away for me. And as part of that bubbling away, I actually happened across a paper on futures and future studies, and I realized that was the path I needed to take. So that's how I got into it. It was in some ways by agonizing over something's not right in the way that we're doing things. There have to be other ways of thinking about this. What might they be?
Okay, great. I'll have to get you to share that paper with us because I want a paper to accompany each one of these interviews. So that would be really good. So if you could do that, Richard.
I'll do
Yeah,
that.
so you're still in it. You've got bitten by the futures bug, and you're still in it. So why? What's it? I mean, you've already given us a reason, really, but I'd like you to sort of go a little deeper into that, please.
I think, well, I know why I'm still in it because that bubbling up, that niggle as I started to research and understand futures better,
Yep.
I realised just how much it has not yet been done in this infrastructure planning space. We all think about the future. All of us, doesn't matter what we do, we're all thinking about the future all the time. In fact, I guess we're just generally facing forward. And so it brings, while I came to it in a professional context, I've also realized that in a personal context and thinking about my children, my grandchild, and future generations, and coming to the later stages of my career, that I've got something to offer to those younger generations by trying to understand things better, some wisdom that I can pass on. That's why I'm still in it. Because for me, it's as much as anything, it's been about sense making, and the sense making process of something that's so ethereal as the futures we're facing. And the deeper I've got into it, the more I realize just how entrenched we have become in the way we do things and how much work we need to do to get out of that rut.
Yep.
And much of it comes through the creative thinking that comes around futures thinking. So that's why I'm still in it. The deeper I get in, the deeper I go.
Oh,
and the deeper I want to go.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's great. So going deep is great, but you need support systems. And I'm interested in, what obstacles have you had to sort of deal with to get a grip on the field?
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle in some ways is perspectives, people's perspectives, their worldviews. And I think futures, back in the 1970s, for example, to give an analogy, back in the 1970s, if someone went to a chiropractor, they were, they were considered kind of nuts. It was a quasi medicine. It wasn't really considered a real medicine. And the medical profession, they perpetuated that view as well. But chiropractors had a particular skill set. And I think it's a little bit like that in futures as well, is that the general population considers all of this. They're confused about it. One, they think it's about prediction, where it's not. They think we have a linear future, but we don't. And they think all of this is really just quackery. And part of that is because of the fuzziness of futures. And one of the realizations I've had in my area is that I hear this, we want evidence-based decisions. Well, as Jim Data tells us, there isn't evidence for the future. There might be broad sweeps of time and directions of travel, but there isn't actual evidence because the futures haven't happened yet. And so people struggle with that. And I find that actually imposes obstacles. Oh, it's all too hard. It's all too soft. It's all too fuzzy. Give us the data.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a very real obstacle. So in your own way, as you've gone into this, you've gone from, being very structured and constructivist into this open area of futures. It's not been a smooth ride, because I've been on the side with you along the way and watching it go. But how did you crack it? And to what extent have you cracked it? I guess it might be a better question, because I don't think even, I've been doing it for decades, and I wouldn't say I've cracked it, but you know what I'm asking, don't you?
I do. Yeah, I don't think I've cracked it. I've cracked something, and there's light coming through, and so enough to go. There's more here to understand. It's too big a topic to ever fully understand, but in some ways that's the beauty of it. How I've cracked it in a professional sense is that, one, I have quite deliberately positioned myself as a thought leader, because that's how increasingly I see myself, as a provocateur. But as a provocateur who is in my area in infrastructure, one of the tribe, and I've cracked it in the sense that my background gives me some legitimacy with the audience that I'm talking to, and so that has been very helpful. In terms of cracking futures, for me, I think the realization that we're moving beyond hard data to narrative, scenarios, visioning, to a softer area that is equally legitimate has probably been the biggest realization in cracking it. Oh, this is uncomfortable. It's uncertain. That's okay. That's how it is. So for me, increasingly, I see that I'm talking to a group that likes dealing with hard data,
Yeah.
and they're making their predictions based on that hard data. And I'm saying, well, that's valuable, but we also need to be thinking of other ways. So let's talk about the softer way and bring the two together. So we've got a data-driven approach and a story or narrative-driven approach, and they both have legitimacy. And then let's line up the results and see how we go. And by bringing people with me in that sense, I think I've been able to not necessarily crack futures, but at least crack open the discussion with people who've got quite hard and fast ways of thinking about infrastructure policy and planning.
That's great. So yeah, dealing with people's assumptions about what is valid knowledge is quite key, I think, to extending the conversation. And yeah, so we should wrap up quite shortly, but is there a point in your own work with futures that you would say was an epiphany point, a point where suddenly something clicked and you thought, yeah, I can really see some dimension of this new world working for me? Was there a point in your the last 4 or 5 years of your work with futures that triggered that?
The storytelling component. So I wrote this comic, Vanishing Point, and that was an epiphany in a way. Hold on, I can actually bring all this together in an imaginative and creative way, as a way of engaging with busy people, to be able to communicate effectively with them, but also take them into a safe space to have discussions about these uncertain futures. And that to me was the epiphany, was to be able to develop something that was fun and engaging and was narrative driven. So permissive actually to go into well, let's tell ourselves a story. What are the futures that we might think about? Which of those we prefer and those of which we don't? What do we think? And to be able to create a safe space for people to engage with the type of material that's actually quite difficult to deal with. I think the comic, the point of getting to the comic, and actually that was a really big professional risk as well. When I first started putting it out there, I was thinking people have had a particular view of me. Now they're seeing something quite different.
Yeah.
They're going to think I'm crazy. But actually, the people I dealt with, where they bought into it. It was like, wow, this is cool. Let's talk about that.
Excellent. So, final word of advice for somebody starting their futures journey, what would it be, Richard?
Do it. Go into the unknown. I think that's the answer. Go into the unknown. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think is probably the advice I would have. And don't worry about the naysayers. I think that's probably the other thing is that I think Sahel's work on CLA is really helpful for understanding how people have different worldviews and why that's shaped and how it shapes their thinking, and that that's okay. But that's one of the reasons we're doing futures is to actually not break down those worldviews necessarily, but shift the way that we think about things.
Yeah.
To have more people engage, do it. Be my advice.
Love it, Richard. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. My
pleasure, as always.
Yeah, I will put up your
the comic.
The comic. I'll put up the link to that because it's still alive, isn't it? It's still up.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll get that from you. If you flick that through to me again, I can make that available as well. So until next time.
Until next time. Pleasure.
Yeah, I'll work out how to turn this off. See ya.
All right. Cheers. Take care.